May the words of my mouth and the meditation of all of our hearts be pleasing to you, O Lord, the one who gives us strength and the one who does redeem us. Amen. Amen. As you leave church this morning, I encourage you to look at the doorpost in both the narthex and the doorpost by the parish hall and offices. You will notice a curious set of numbers and letters. It's been a tradition in the church throughout the years on Epiphany to write these letters and words and numbers. 20, cross C, cross M, cross B, and for this year, 18. So 2018, CMB. Casper, Melchior, and Balthazar. The three alleged names of many who came to see Jesus at his birth or shortly after his birth. We're not quite sure, but these folks who came to see Jesus, and so every Epiphany, there have been many people who have marked that through the doorpost. It's a way of saying, it's a way of reminding all of us that in your going out and your coming in, you're returning to Bethlehem. Religious folks have done similar things throughout the centuries. Catholics in Ireland typically put out crosses above their doorways. That reminder, the going out and coming in of our homes. That cross is a reminder of our identity, to whom we belong and what's most important. Many Jews have a similar custom. They put on their doorpost something called a mezuzah. It's a small instrument, but within that mezuzah is a tiny parchment with these words from the Torah. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your might. And these words which I command you today shall be upon your heart. You shall teach them to your children, and you shall speak of them when you sit and when you walk on the road, when you lie down and when you rise. You shall bind them as a sign upon your hand, and they shall be a reminder between your eyes. And you shall write them upon the doorpost of your house. So those who have a mezuzah, as they leave and as they come in, they touch the mezuzah as a reminder, a sign, a marking, a reminder of to whom they belong. Markings, recitations are good things. They're good reminders. We have all kinds of ways that we show identity. Many street signs in this country are named for the people who once upon a time lived on that street. So it was important. It was a way to identify, to mark who was there. We wear rings as a way to identify who we are. Some of you wear badges to mark at least to whom you belong to Monday through Friday, or however many hours you work a week. When Alexis and I moved into a new townhome a few years ago, as we made our way through the townhome, I noticed in every house, in every room, a framed picture of the Virgin Mother. As we walked around, I began to deduce she was Egyptian. So at one point I turned to her and I said, "I'm assuming you're Coptic Christian." And tears began to form in her eye. And she said, "You know, there aren't many people in this world who remember the Coptics anymore." She asked, "How did you know I'm a Coptic?" I said, "Well, it's part of my job description to know these kinds of things." And she turned to the agent and said, "I want them to have this house." So know your religious history. It might come in real handy someday for you. We are all marked in certain ways, and we need to remember those markings. William Willimon is one of my favorite writers and preachers. He's a retired Methodist bishop, former teacher at Duke, head of Duke Chapel at one point, prolific author. A rather sarcastic sense of humor as well, so you kind of have to know how to take Will. He writes in his book about preaching to the baptized, an incident that happened a number of years ago when he was part of a panel discussion talking about baptism and how it makes us very unique and different from the world. It makes us distinctive. We are told who we are in baptism. So he said after the discussion, a young man came up to him, rather upset. "I'm a baptized Episcopalian, and none of you have the right to tell me how I am to define myself." Again, knowing Willimon's sense of humor, he said, "Of course it was an Episcopalian. Episcopalians like to define themselves and who they are and not let anyone else tell us who we are." So Willimon said, if the first declaration were true, "I'm a baptized Episcopalian," his second was utterly false. In baptizing this young man, the church was quite clear that we were telling him who he is, namely a cherished child of God who was washed, gifted, chosen, called, and named. He is defined. We who are baptized are defined. We, at baptism, not only do you have a little bit of water put on you, but we seal you with the sign of the cross on your forehead and say you are marked as Christ's own forever. That is your identity. Maybe some of you remember your own baptism or remember your child's baptism. What do you visualize as baptism? Perhaps it's a pretty church, a pretty font, frilly white gown, family coming together and celebrating. This is one way to depict baptism. If you all notice this on the back of your net. No beautiful font, no white gowns, but out in the muck in the middle of the Jordan, getting dirty when you get washed at the same time. My baptism was something similar to this. Although I did not hold my nose, the minister forcefully grabbed my nose and pushed me into the water. I remember that very vividly. I also remember quite vividly that the gentleman who went before me failed to remember the minister's instructions before baptism. And then his instructions were, make sure you put your feet in the cinder block at the bottom of the baptistry, this very large, almost pool. He said, it's very important to put your feet in there. This gentleman did not, and he sprang up in the water. And I remember watching the minister trying to fight him to put him upright so he could baptize him. Remember him grabbing my nose and pushing me down into the water and then pulling me back with the words, you have been buried with Christ. You have been buried in death with Christ, and you have been raised to walk in newness of life with him. Some of you were at Shrinemont a couple of years ago to hear Martin Smith, our retreat leader. Martin is a prolific author, retreat leader, former monk at our Episcopal Monastery, Society of St. John the Evangelist in Cambridge, Massachusetts. Martin came to talk in part about what makes us unique as Christians. He reminded us, as we heard just a little bit ago, the story of creation. He reminded us that each and every one of you are part of God's creation. And we sometimes pay lip service to that. We may intellectually know that. But Martin, in only the way Martin could do, through some language I can't share in church, do you really believe and know that you are part of God's creation? And so when God said that creation was good, he meant you as well. Do you really believe that? Martin challenged us with that. He also challenged us to remember that the Greek word for baptism is immersion. It is getting dunked. It's going down into death and coming back out. Martin recalled that before he became a monk and priest, he fancied himself, and he used that word because he's British, he fancied himself to become an archaeologist one day. And so he went through the countryside in England looking for wells. He was fascinated with finding ancient wells. And he remembers one particular day he was in the countryside and he couldn't find a particular well. He had been told it was there by good authority, and he just kept walking around and couldn't find any source of water until he noticed a group of cows standing in mud and muck. Oh, there's a source of water. Martin makes his way over to the cows, and eventually he does find the well. And he was struck that he found water, he found life, a source of life, in the very muck and mess that is life. In a baptism, we are buried in our muck and mess, and we are raised to newness of life. We are marked. Baptism's a big deal. Yesterday at Epiphany, we marked going to Bethlehem to see the Christ child. So at our service last night, during the sermon, I had the congregation follow me. We walked over to the narthex doors here, said a few prayers. I wrote the inscription above. We then walked to the front door by the church office, said a few prayers, marked who we are, our identity. In the going out and the coming in, we continue to go to Bethlehem to see this child. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your might. And these words which I command you today shall be upon your heart, and you shall write them upon the doorpost of your house and upon your gates. Or as we say at baptism, for all of you, not just in this space, not just within these walls, but in our going out and our coming in, you are marked as Christ's own forever, created by God and belonging to Christ forever. Amen.